In the Hartwell family's oceanfront mansion in Savannah, every room was designed to remind a guest exactly where they stood. The dining room looked out over the dark Atlantic, its windows tall enough to make the moonlit water seem like part of the house. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. Silverware lined the white tablecloth in perfect rows. Oil paintings of stern men in dark suits watched from the walls, each one a reminder that the Hartwell name had been rich long before anyone at that table had been born. Elijah Brooks sat among them in his only tailored suit, his hands folded loosely in his lap. He was 34 years old, a black single father, and an HVAC repairman from Atlanta. He knew how to climb a roof in August heat, how to replace a burned compressor, and how to talk a frightened customer through a midnight emergency when their air conditioner died in the middle of a Georgia summer. He knew how to braid his daughter's hair before school, how to stretch a paycheck, and how to keep going when grief made a house feel too quiet. What he did not know was how to sit across from the family of the woman he loved while they looked at him like a mistake that had wandered into their bloodline. Vivian Hartwell sat beside him, elegant in a pale blue dress, her engagement ring flashing whenever she reached for her glass. Earlier that evening, she had squeezed Elijah's hand under the table and whispered that everything would be fine. But everything was not fine. The dinner had been polite in the way a locked door was polite. Charles Hartwell asked Elijah about work as if asking about a stain on the carpet. Beatrice Hartwell smiled without warmth and referred to Elijah's 8-year-old daughter Grace as the little girl, instead of using her name. Then, just as dessert was served, Charles placed a thick folder on the table. "We believe in clarity," he said. Elijah looked at the folder. The title page read, "Premarital Agreement." Vivian did not seem surprised. That was the first blow. The second came when Charles slid the contract toward him and explained, in a calm, business-like voice, that the Hartwell family had assets to protect. Beatrice added that unequal marriages often created unfortunate expectations. Then Charles pointed to the signature line as if Elijah had already agreed to be humiliated. Elijah opened the document. Nearly 60 pages. Vivian's property would remain Vivian's. Her family's money would remain untouched. If the marriage failed, Elijah would leave with nothing. Vivian would have no legal or financial responsibility toward Grace. If they had a child together, Vivian would hold primary control over education, medical decisions, residence, and financial planning. It was not just a prenup, it was a verdict. Poor, unworthy, temporary. Elijah turned to Vivian, waiting for her to say something. Waiting for the woman who had once told him that money was only a shell, and character was what mattered. Vivian lowered her eyes, then pushed a pen toward him. "If you're not marrying me for money," she said softly, "then this shouldn't change anything." No one at that table knew that 3 days earlier, Elijah had received a letter from a law office in New Orleans. No one knew about his late uncle, Samuel Brooks. No one knew about the inheritance waiting for him when he turned 35. $10 million. Elijah looked at the pen, then at Vivian, then at the people who thought they were protecting themselves from him. And slowly, he signed. Before the truth comes out, remember to follow this channel for more stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet strength of people who are underestimated until life forces everyone to see who they really are. Elijah Brooks had learned early that a man could be exhausted and still have no permission to stop. Most mornings began before sunrise in the small rental house he shared with his daughter on the outskirts of Atlanta. The place was clean but worn down, with a kitchen faucet that sometimes rattled, a porch light Elijah kept meaning to replace, and a hallway wall covered with Grace's drawings. Some showed flowers, some showed houses with yellow windows. Many showed 3 stick figures holding hands, though one of those figures always had angel wings. Grace was 8 years old, quiet in public, talkative at home, and old enough to understand that her family was different from the families she saw at school. Her mother, Naomi Brooks, had died 3 years earlier in a car accident on a rainy night outside Macon. Since then, Elijah had become everything at once: father, mother, cook, driver, bedtime reader, hairstylist, nurse, protector, and the person who had to smile even when he had no idea how to keep smiling. He worked in HVAC repair because the work was steady and honest. It was not glamorous, but it paid the rent, kept groceries in the refrigerator, and bought Grace new shoes when she outgrew the old ones too quickly. In summer, Elijah climbed onto roofs so hot they seemed to breathe fire. In winter, he crawled through dark attics and basements, fixing furnaces while his hands went stiff from cold. He carried tools in the back of an old pickup, kept invoices clipped to the visor, and answered emergency calls even when his body begged for sleep. At night, after Grace was in bed, he sometimes sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and paid bills one by one. Rent first, utilities next, school fees if he could manage them, something for Grace's lunch account, a little toward the truck repair he kept postponing. There was never much left, but Elijah had made peace with that. He did not need much. He only needed Grace to feel safe. That was why meeting Vivian Hartwell had surprised him. It happened at the Marlowe Gallery, a polished art space in Atlanta where the air smelled faintly of lilies and expensive perfume. Elijah had been called in because the gallery's climate control system was malfunctioning before a private exhibit. Paintings worth more than his annual salary hung under soft lights while wealthy guests were expected that evening. Vivian had been the one to meet him at the door. At first, Elijah assumed she was like most clients in places like that, polite enough to his face, impatient the moment he turned away. But Vivian was different. She asked his name. She listened when he explained the problem. She brought him a bottle of water without making it feel like charity. When she noticed the small drawing taped inside his toolbox lid, she smiled. "Did your daughter make that?" Elijah looked down at the crayon picture of a purple house with crooked windows. "Grace, she says my toolbox needs decoration." "It does," Vivian said. "She has good taste." The comment was simple, but it stayed with him. Over the next few months, Elijah saw Vivian several more times. Sometimes at the gallery, sometimes when she arranged repairs for clients. She was an art broker, the kind of woman who knew which collectors wanted coastal landscapes and which wanted abstract paintings no one else understood. She moved easily through rooms Elijah would normally avoid, yet she never made him feel foolish for not knowing the rules. When they began dating, Elijah moved slowly. He had Grace to think about. He could not bring a woman into his daughter's life just because he felt lonely. But Vivian seemed to understand that. She did not push. She met Grace at a park, not a restaurant. She brought a sketchbook instead of a toy that cost too much. She sat on a bench while Grace drew a tree and asked questions as if the answers mattered. Grace liked her. That mattered more to Elijah than anything. Vivian came to their small house for dinner one Friday evening and ate spaghetti from chipped plates without complaint. She praised Grace's drawings taped to the wall. She helped dry dishes. Later, after Grace had gone to bed, Vivian stood in the doorway of the little living room and said, "I know my world probably looks very different from yours." Elijah almost laughed. "Probably." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Money is loud where I come from. People pretend it isn't, but it is. I don't want to be that way." "Then don't be." "I'm trying." He believed her. That belief carried him through the first awkward meeting with her parents, Charles and Beatrice Hartwell. They lived in Savannah but seemed to carry their family name like a passport that granted access to better rooms, better tables, better treatment. Charles owned boutique hotels along the coast. Beatrice belonged to committees, charity boards, and social circles where reputation was a second religion. They did not insult Elijah directly at first. They were too polished for that. Charles asked whether HVAC repair was stable enough for a growing family. Beatrice asked if Grace would be comfortable with the changes that came from joining a Hartwell household, though her tone suggested she was more concerned about whether the household would be comfortable with Grace. Vivian squeezed Elijah's hand afterward and apologized. "They just need time," she said. Elijah wanted to believe that too. A week before the engagement dinner, a letter arrived from Dawson and Price, a law office in New Orleans. Elijah almost threw it away, assuming it was some kind of advertisement or mistake. He knew no lawyers in New Orleans. But the envelope included his full legal name, and the letter inside mentioned Samuel Brooks. Uncle Samuel had always been a quiet mystery in Elijah's family. He had been his father's older brother, a software engineer who rarely came to reunions and never stayed long when he did. Elijah remembered him as a thin man with silver-framed glasses, careful speech, and a habit of asking children what they wanted to build rather than what they wanted to be. Samuel had died earlier that year. Elijah had sent flowers but had not expected anything more. The letter said otherwise. When Elijah called the number at the bottom of the page, attorney Martin Price explained that Samuel had named Elijah as the primary beneficiary of his estate. Years ago, Samuel had invested in a small medical technology company before it became successful. He had also purchased property in Louisiana and Georgia, invested carefully, and lived far below his means. The estate, Martin said, was valued at approximately $10 million. Elijah sat down because his knees weakened. Martin explained that Elijah would formally receive control of the inheritance when he turned 35. There were documents to review, signatures to prepare, and special provisions in the will that Samuel had written himself. "What kind of provisions?" Elijah asked. "Your uncle believed money revealed character," Martin said. "He wanted the estate used in a way that built rather than destroyed. We will go through every clause when the transfer date arrived." Elijah did not know what to say. $10 million sounded like a number from someone else's life. He looked around his kitchen at the loose cabinet handle, the stack of bills, Grace's school backpack by the door, and felt no joy at first, only shock, then fear. He did not tell Vivian immediately, though the secret sat heavily inside him. He told himself he was waiting until he understood it. He told himself he wanted to speak to Martin in person first. He told himself he did not want money to change the way Vivian looked at him. But beneath all those reasons was a quieter truth. Part of him needed to know whether she loved the man he was before she knew about the man he might become. The engagement dinner at the Hartwell mansion gave him the answer he feared. When Charles placed the prenup in front of him, Elijah felt every warning he had ignored come alive. When Beatrice spoke of protection and expectations, he heard what she truly meant. When Vivian failed to defend him, something inside him stepped back from the table even though his body remained seated. Still, he signed. He signed because he loved Vivian enough to give her one final chance. He signed because he had seen kindness in her and wanted to know whether it was real or merely convenient. He signed because he refused to announce his inheritance in a room full of people who might suddenly decide he was worthy after all. And he signed because, if the Hartwells wanted to put their judgment of him in writing, Elijah was willing to let that paper tell the truth later. After the wedding, Elijah and Grace moved into Vivian's townhouse in Savannah, a 3-story home with tall windows, white furniture, polished floors, and art on the walls that looked too expensive to breathe near. Vivian called it peaceful. Grace called it quiet, but Elijah could tell she meant something else. Their old rental in Atlanta had creaked when the wind pushed against it. The kitchen faucet rattled. The hallway was narrow. The porch steps needed repair. But Grace had moved through that house like it belonged to her. She had left crayons on the table, taped drawings to the wall, and fallen asleep on the couch with one sock missing and a book open on her chest. In Vivian's townhouse, Grace walked like a guest. She asked before sitting on the sofa. She held her juice with both hands. She stared at the pale rug in the living room as if it were a pond she might fall into. Whenever she wanted to draw, she spread newspaper under her sketchbook, even when Elijah told her she did not have to. Vivian noticed, but at first she tried. She bought Grace new dresses, a winter coat, and a set of watercolor paints in a wooden case. She took her for ice cream near the river and posted a picture of the 3 of them online with the caption, "My little family." She kissed Elijah's cheek in the mornings and asked about his schedule. Sometimes, for a moment, Elijah thought maybe the dinner at the mansion had been a terrible beginning rather than a warning. Vivian seemed sincere in those first weeks, but every visit from her parents, every polished dinner with old friends, and every raised eyebrow from her social circle pulled her back toward the world she claimed she wanted to leave behind. Small things began to gather. The first time Vivian introduced Elijah to one of her clients after the wedding, she said, "My husband works in mechanical systems," then quickly added, "He's thinking about starting his own company." Elijah did not correct her. He only watched the relief pass across her face when the client nodded with approval. Another time, when Grace came downstairs in her favorite yellow sneakers, Vivian smiled too tightly and said, "Those are fun. Maybe for school, sweetheart. For lunch with my mother, we should choose something a little more polished." Grace looked down at her shoes. "They're clean." "I know," Vivian said, "but clean and appropriate are not always the same thing." Elijah saw Grace's shoulders fold inward. He told himself Vivian was adjusting. He told himself blending families took time. He told himself that love did not mean two people automatically knew how to live together. Then came the night he worked 13 hours on emergency calls during a heat wave. He had spent the afternoon on the roof of a small restaurant, replacing a fan motor while the sun beat down so hard the metal burned through his gloves. By the time he reached home, his shirt was damp, his boots were dusty, and his lower back ached with every step. He opened the front door and heard Vivian before he saw her. "Elijah, wait!" He froze with one foot inside. Vivian stood near the staircase looking at the floor. A faint trail of dust marked the polished wood behind him. "I just had the floors cleaned," she said. He looked at her, waiting for the laugh, the softening, the moment when she would see his face and remember he was her husband. It did not come. "I'll clean it," he said. "That's not the point. Could you use the side entrance when you come home from work? Just on days like this." "Days like what?" She hesitated. "When you're coming straight from a job." Elijah felt the words settle between them like grit. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She looked from Vivian to Elijah, then down at his boots. "I'm sorry," Elijah said quietly. He was not sure which of them he was apologizing to. That night, after Grace went to bed, Elijah scrubbed the floor himself. Vivian stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, looking troubled but not apologetic. "You're upset," she said. "I'm tired." "That is not the same thing." "No," he said, "it's not." She came closer. "I didn't mean anything by it." "That might be the problem." Vivian frowned. "I'm trying to make this home work for all of us." "For all of us?" Elijah repeated. "Grace is afraid to sit on the couch." "She is not afraid, she is adjusting." "She asked me yesterday if she was allowed to touch the piano." "It is an antique." "She's 8. Vivian's face tightened. "And she can learn to respect things." Elijah dried his hands slowly. "Things are not the issue." Vivian turned away first. A week later, Grace spilled blue watercolor paint on the edge of Vivian's imported rug. It happened on a Saturday afternoon while Elijah was repairing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. Grace had been painting a picture of a beach, trying to make the water look like nighttime. Her elbow bumped the cup. The blue spread fast. Grace gasped, then began blotting it with napkins, making the stain worse. Vivian rushed in and stopped cold. Her face changed before her voice did. "Grace!" The little girl flinched. "I'm sorry," Grace said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Elijah entered the room. "It was an accident." Vivian pressed her lips together. "I can see that." But her tone said something else. Grace looked ready to cry. Vivian took the napkins from her hand. "In a home like this, we have to be careful. Some things are very difficult to replace." Elijah said, "Vivian." She looked at him. "What? I'm not yelling." "No, but you're making her feel like she broke the house." Vivian inhaled sharply. "I am making her understand consequences. You cannot protect her from every uncomfortable feeling." She spilled paint on a rug that costs more than some people's monthly rent. The moment the words left her mouth, silence filled the room. Grace stared at the floor. Elijah's voice dropped. "Go upstairs, baby." Grace ran. Vivian closed her eyes. That came out wrong. Did it? Elijah, don't do that.
Do what?
Turn every mistake I make into proof that I'm a terrible person. I didn't say you were terrible. You didn't have to. Elijah looked toward the staircase where Grace had disappeared. She asked me if this was her home. Vivian's anger faded, replaced by discomfort. What did you say? I didn't know what to say. That should have broken something open in Vivian. It should have made her run upstairs and apologize. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself and whispered, "I don't know how to do this perfectly." Elijah almost softened. Almost. Then she added, "Grace is your daughter, Elijah. I love her, but you can't expect me to become her mother overnight. I never asked you to replace Naomi. But you expect me to be responsible for everything. I expect you to be kind." Vivian had no answer. From then on, the prenup was no longer just a document Elijah had signed at a table. It had become a shadow in the house. Vivian never mentioned it directly, but it lived in her language. Your daughter, your responsibilities, my family's property, my house, my parents' concerns. Every time she drew a line, Elijah saw Charles's pen. Still, he waited. He had promised himself he would not act from anger. He watched. He listened. He gave Vivian chances to see herself. One Thursday afternoon, he was called to the Marlowe Gallery branch in Savannah, where Vivian was hosting a private event for collectors. The building's cooling system had begun cycling unevenly, and the gallery director needed it fixed before guests arrived. Elijah considered sending one of the younger technicians, but the request came directly to him. He drove over, parked behind the building, and entered through the service door. He did not tell Vivian he was there. He was not hiding from her. He simply did not want to become another thing she had to explain. The event space was half ready, with floral arrangements on pedestals and champagne glasses lined on trays. Elijah worked in the rear corridor, checking ducts and the control board. Voices drifted from the main room, bright and careless. Then he heard Vivian laugh. He paused, one hand on his tool bag. A woman said, "I still can't believe you actually married the HVAC guy." Another voice added, "Vivian Hartwell, queen of coastal fine art, married to a man who fixes air conditioners. It sounds like a documentary." Elijah waited. Vivian said, "Stop. He's a good man." That should have been enough, but the women kept laughing. "I'm sure he is," the first woman said. "Good men can still be wildly off-brand." There was a pause. Elijah could almost see Vivian smiling the strained smile she used when she wanted approval. "He is very responsible," Vivian said, "and he loves Grace. That matters to me." "But?" Vivian sighed. "But yes, sometimes it is hard. He doesn't really understand this world. The events, the expectations, the way people talk. I thought love would make the differences feel smaller." "And?" "Some days they feel bigger." Elijah's hand tightened around the screwdriver. Vivian continued, softer now, as if confessing something intimate. "Sometimes I feel like I'm pulling him into a life he doesn't know how to stand in. He's simple, not in a bad way, safe, grounded, grateful." Grateful. The word hit Elijah harder than the laughter. He finished the repair because that was what he had been hired to do. He checked the system, cleaned the panel, packed his tools, and left through the back without letting Vivian know he had been there. That night, Vivian noticed his silence. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. He rinsed a plate in the sink. "Should I be?" "I don't know. You've barely spoken." "I'm tired." "You're always tired lately." Elijah turned off the water. "Maybe I am." She studied him. "This is exactly what I mean. You shut down, and then I'm supposed to guess what I did." He looked at her for a long moment, wondering if she wanted truth or absolution. Then Grace called from upstairs asking for help with a math problem. Elijah dried his hands and went to his daughter. A few days later, the gallery called again. The cooling problem had returned in one wing of the building. Elijah almost refused the job, then decided he wanted the system fixed correctly so they would not call him a third time. This time he arrived early, before the evening event. He worked above the service corridor, replacing a faulty relay. When he climbed down, he heard Vivian in the office nearby. She was speaking to Celeste Whitman, one of her oldest friends. "You have to tell him," Celeste said. "I will." "When?" "When I know what I'm doing." Elijah stopped. Celeste lowered her voice. "Vivian, you're pregnant. Elijah is your husband." The world narrowed. Elijah stood in the corridor, not breathing. Vivian said, "I know that." "How far along?" 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Elijah gripped the edge of a metal shelf. His first feeling was not anger. It was a sudden rush of tenderness so painful it almost knocked him down. A baby. His child. Grace's brother or sister. A life he had not known existed. Then Vivian spoke again. "I just need to arrange things before everything becomes emotional." "Arrange what?" "Doctors, insurance, the right preschool lists, a trust structure, where we'll live, how decisions will be made." Celeste was quiet. "You make it sound like a merger." "It's not a merger. It's my child." "Our child," Celeste corrected gently. Vivian did not answer right away. Then she said, "Elijah is a good father to Grace. I know that. But Grace comes from a different life, a painful one. Everything around her is tied to Naomi, to loss, to that little house, to the way Elijah had to survive. I don't want my child raised inside that grief." Elijah closed his eyes. Celeste said, "Grace is a child, Viv." "I know, and she's sweet, but she is also a responsibility Elijah brought with him. I did not understand how heavy that would feel every day." The words cut through him. Vivian continued, her voice trembling now, but not enough to stop. "The prenup at least made some things clear. If anything ever happened between us, there would be boundaries. I need to be sure Elijah cannot override every decision because he thinks being a good father means controlling everything." Elijah stepped back. His shoulder struck the shelf. A small metal part rolled off and clattered onto the floor. The office went silent. "Elijah?" Vivian called. He did not answer. He picked up his tool bag and walked out. Vivian caught him in the parking lot. "Elijah, wait!" He reached his truck and opened the door. "You heard me," she said. He looked at her then. Her face was pale, one hand pressed to her stomach as if protecting the child from the consequences of her own words. "How long were you going to keep it from me?" he asked. "I was going to tell you." "When? After you picked the doctor? After you built the trust? After you decided how much of a father I was allowed to be?" Tears rose in her eyes. "I was scared." "Of me?" "No, of everything changing." "It already did." She shook her head. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." Elijah laughed once without humor. "You're right. I don't understand what it feels like to be pressured into treating a child like baggage." Vivian flinched. "I shouldn't have said that." "But you believed it long enough to say it." "Elijah, please." He looked past her toward the gallery where workers were arranging flowers for people who would never know what had just broken outside. "This weekend," he said, "I'm taking you to Atlanta." "Why?" "There are 3 places you need to see." She wiped her face. "What does that mean?" "It means if you want me to believe you ever loved the real parts of my life, you're going to look at them." The first place was the old house in Atlanta where Elijah and Naomi had lived after they married. It was smaller than Vivian remembered from the few pictures she had seen. The paint on the porch rail had peeled. The grass had grown wild near the fence. A rust stain marked the driveway where Elijah's old car used to leak. Vivian stood on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself. "This is where Grace was born?" she asked. "No, hospital across town, but this is where we brought her home." Elijah walked to the porch but did not go inside. Another family lived there now. He only stood where he had stood years ago, holding newborn Grace while Naomi laughed because he was afraid he might drop her. "We didn't have much," he said. "The heater broke our first winter. The roof leaked over the bedroom. Naomi used to joke that the house had more personality than structure." Vivian looked at him. "But she never made me feel poor," he continued. "Not once. We ate cheap food, bought used furniture, patched what we couldn't replace. But I never walked through that door and wondered if I belonged." Vivian lowered her gaze. "The night you told me to use the side entrance," Elijah said, "I thought about this place. I came home filthy 100 times here. Naomi would hand me a towel and ask if I had eaten." "I'm sorry," Vivian whispered. "I know you are right now. I need you to understand why." The second place was the Community Trade Center where Elijah had learned HVAC repair. It sat in a plain brick building behind a bus depot. Inside, the air smelled of oil, metal, and dust. Students worked at training stations, taking apart old units under the supervision of an instructor Elijah still knew. A few people greeted him by name. Vivian watched the way they respected him, not because he owned hotels, not because of his last name, because he knew the work, and he had once been where they were. "This place saved me after Naomi died," Elijah said. "I had a daughter, bills, grief so heavy I could barely stand up, and no one coming to rescue me. This trade gave me a way to feed Grace." He held up his hands. "You saw dirt, you saw sweat, you saw something to hide from your friends. But these hands kept my daughter's lights on." Vivian cried then, quietly, with one hand over her mouth. Elijah did not comfort her. The third place was Naomi's grave. The cemetery was shaded by old trees, the grass clean and green. Grace had placed a painted stone at the base of the headstone a month earlier. It was still there, sealed badly, the colors fading from rain. Vivian stood behind Elijah, afraid to come closer. Elijah knelt and brushed leaves away from the stone. "Naomi never got to live the life we planned," he said. "She never got the house we wanted, the second child we talked about, the little garden she kept describing. But she loved Grace with everything she had." His voice tightened, but he steadied it. "Grace is not a responsibility I dragged into your life. She is my daughter. She is a child who lost her mother. When you make her feel like she is in the way, you are hurting the one person I swore I would protect from everything I could." Vivian's tears fell freely now. "I didn't mean to hurt her." "Meaning it is not the only way to do damage." Vivian stepped closer. "I know I failed you." Elijah turned to face her. "You failed Grace first." She looked as if he had struck her. He continued, "I know about the baby. I know what you were planning. I know you thought the prenup gave you boundaries you could use against me if I became inconvenient." "No," she said. "I was scared. I was wrong, but I wasn't trying to take your child away." "You were trying to make sure you had control before I even knew the child existed." Vivian had no defense. Elijah looked at Naomi's name carved in stone, then back at his wife. "When I turn 35, he said, you will understand exactly who you put that contract in front of." Vivian's face changed. Fear moved through her eyes. "What are you talking about?" But Elijah walked away without answering. 3 weeks later, he turned 35. The inheritance became official on a Monday morning. By noon, a local business reporter had posted a story about Samuel Brooks, the quiet software engineer whose early investments in medical technology had grown into a fortune. By late afternoon, Elijah's name was everywhere. HVAC technician inherits $10 million from late uncle. The headline spread faster than Elijah expected. Old clients called. Reporters left messages. Men who had once ignored him now wanted interviews about hard work and humility. Women from Vivian's social circle sent congratulations filled with exclamation points and false warmth. Charles Hartwell called 6 times. Beatrice sent a message inviting Elijah to a birthday dinner at the mansion, as if the dinner had always been planned. Vivian stood in the kitchen holding her phone, watching Elijah read the message. "You don't have to go," she said. "I know." "Then why are you?" He put the phone down. "Because I want to hear what respect sounds like when it arrives late." That evening, Elijah dressed carefully, not to impress them, to remind himself that calm could be sharper than rage. The Hartwell dining room looked exactly as it had the night he signed the prenup. Same long table, same paintings, same ocean beyond the windows. But the people had changed their faces. Charles rose immediately and embraced him. "Elijah, son," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Happy birthday! We are so proud of you." "Son." Elijah let the word pass without touching him. Beatrice smiled with wet eyes. "You have always had such quiet dignity. I told Charles from the beginning there was something exceptional about you." Elijah looked at her. "Did you?" Her smile trembled. Vivian sat pale and silent. Dinner was unbearable in its politeness. Charles asked about the estate with forced casualness. Beatrice mentioned family unity. They praised Samuel Brooks as if they had known him. They spoke of Elijah's discipline, his character, his inspiring rise, as though poverty had been a costume he had worn for their eventual admiration. Finally, Elijah placed a large envelope on the table. Vivian knew before anyone else. "Elijah," she whispered. Charles looked confused. "What is this?" "A divorce petition." No one moved. Beatrice's fork slipped against her plate. Charles recovered first. "Now, let's not be emotional." "I'm not." "This family has had misunderstandings," Charles said. "Painful ones, clearly, but a child is coming. And now circumstances have changed." Elijah leaned back. "Circumstances?" Charles cleared his throat. "Perhaps the agreement should be revisited. Not because of the money, of course, but because a marriage should evolve when circumstances change." "The agreement you forced me to sign?" "No one forced you," Beatrice said quickly. "We simply wanted to protect Vivian." "And now?" Charles's jaw tightened. "Now we want to protect the marriage." Elijah looked from Charles to Beatrice to Vivian. "When you thought I was poor, fairness meant I left with nothing. It meant Grace was not Vivian's responsibility. It meant any child I had with Vivian could be structured around my limitations. Now that I have money, fairness means reconsidering." Charles said nothing. Elijah tapped the envelope. "The prenup stands. My inheritance is mine. If Vivian and I divorce, she receives none of it." Beatrice's face drained of color. Vivian began to cry, but Elijah could not tell what part of her was breaking. The wife who had lost his trust, the daughter exposed before her parents, or the woman who finally understood that the document she had allowed to humiliate him had become the wall protecting him from them all. Elijah stood. "That contract told me exactly who you believed I was," he said. "Now it can tell you exactly what you are entitled to." Then he walked out of the Hartwell mansion, leaving the ocean, the silver, the portraits, and the silence behind him. Elijah did not sleep the night he left the Hartwell mansion. He returned to the townhouse, packed 2 bags, and woke Grace before sunrise. He told her they were going back to Atlanta for a while. Grace did not ask many questions. She only looked toward the hallway that led to Vivian's bedroom and whispered, "Is she coming?" Elijah paused. "No," he said. "Not today." Grace nodded as if she had expected that answer. Vivian stood in the doorway when they came downstairs. Her eyes were swollen and she wore no makeup. For once, she did not look like a Hartwell woman arranged for public approval. She looked young, frightened, and stripped of every defense she had used to keep herself from feeling the damage she had caused. "Elijah," she said. He carried Grace's bag to the door. "Not now. Please, just let me say goodbye to her." Grace moved closer to Elijah's side. Vivian saw it. The tiny motion hurt more than any accusation could have. She lowered herself to Grace's height but did not reach for her. "Grace," she said softly, "I'm sorry." Grace looked at the floor. Vivian's voice shook. "I made you feel like you didn't belong here. That was wrong. You did not do anything to deserve that." Grace said nothing. Elijah opened the door. Vivian stood as they left, one hand resting lightly over her stomach, watching the family she had wanted but had not known how to cherish walk away from the home she had once thought was perfect. In Atlanta, Elijah rented a small house near Grace's school and the community trade center. It had 2 bedrooms, a fenced backyard, and a kitchen with cabinets that did not match. Grace chose the smaller bedroom because the window faced a maple tree. On the first night, she taped one of her drawings to the wall without asking permission. Elijah saw it and almost broke. The divorce papers remained unsigned on his desk. His attorney was ready. Martin Price told him the prenup strongly protected his separate inheritance. Elijah could end the marriage, establish custody arrangements for the unborn child after birth, and move forward without giving the Hartwell family access to $1. Legally, everything seemed clear. Emotionally, nothing was. Elijah thought of the baby Vivian carried. He thought of Grace growing up with only stories of Naomi's voice. He thought of another child entering the world already divided between lawyers, bitterness, and blame. He knew staying in a broken marriage could damage children. He also knew hatred could become a house they were forced to live in. Vivian came to Atlanta 3 days later. She did not arrive in a luxury car. She drove herself in a plain rental, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. Elijah met her on the porch while Grace stayed inside. "I know I don't deserve to be here," Vivian said. "You're right," she nodded. "I'm not here to argue. That would be new." She absorbed that without defending herself. "I was cruel, not always loudly, sometimes politely, sometimes in ways I convinced myself were reasonable, but I was cruel." Elijah watched her carefully. Vivian continued. "I let my parents decide what kind of man you were. I let my friends make me ashamed of the work that kept your daughter safe. I treated Grace like something I had to manage instead of a child I promised to love. And I hid our baby from you because I wanted control before I wanted honesty." The porch was quiet. "Elijah," she said, "I am not asking you to forgive me today. I'm asking for the chance to become someone who would not do those things again." He looked through the window. Grace sat at the kitchen table, coloring. Her shoulders were relaxed for the first time in weeks. "You don't get to practice on my daughter," he said. "I know." "You don't get to use this baby to pull me back." "I know." "You don't get to cry and call that change." Vivian wiped her face quickly, almost ashamed of the tears. "Then tell me what change looks like." Elijah almost told her it was too late. The words were ready, but the baby changed the weight of the moment. Not because Vivian deserved him, but because Elijah refused to build the next chapter from rage alone. 45 days, he said. Vivian blinked. "What?" "You have 45 days, not to win me back, not to erase what happened, to show me whether you can live differently when no one is applauding you for it." She nodded quickly. "I'll do anything." "No, that's not the answer. You'll do specific things." He told her she would leave the townhouse for those 45 days. If she wanted to understand the family she had damaged, she would live near them in Atlanta, not in a house where Grace felt like a visitor. She would not control the space. She would not correct every mess. She would learn what it meant for a home to hold people, not display them. Vivian agreed. He told her she would step away from the gallery events and private collector dinners during those 45 days. He was not ordering her to abandon her career, but she had to stop hiding inside a world that praised her for having the right last name. She would use her time, her skills, and her connections somewhere they could actually help people who did not live behind gates. Vivian agreed again. He told her Grace needed an apology built from action. Vivian would drive her to school if Grace allowed it, help with homework if Grace asked, attend meetings, listen when Grace talked about Naomi. And if Grace rejected her, Vivian would not punish the child for needing time. Vivian's face crumpled, but she said, "Yes." Finally, Elijah told her that money could not be used as theater. No public donations with her name glowing on a wall. No social media. No charity performance meant to impress him or embarrass her parents. If she gave, she would give quietly. Vivian looked at him and said, "I understand." Elijah did not know if she did, but for the first time, she sounded like she wanted to. Vivian rented a modest apartment 10 minutes away. The first week was awkward and painful. Grace barely spoke to her. Elijah remained guarded. Vivian made mistakes without meaning to. Once, she stiffened when Grace spilled cereal on the floor but caught herself before speaking. Another time, she tried to buy Grace an expensive art kit, then returned it and brought plain sketch pads instead. Grace noticed. At the Center for Single Mothers and Children Affected by Traffic Accidents, Vivian began as a volunteer. The director, a blunt woman named Denise Parker, was not impressed by her. "We don't need rich women passing through for a redemption story," Denise said. Vivian looked embarrassed but stayed. "Then don't let me pass through." Denise gave her filing work, then supply inventory, then phone calls. Vivian did every task without complaint. She drove a mother named Carla to a job interview when Carla's car broke down. She watched 2 toddlers in the playroom while their grandmother filled out assistance forms. She sat with a boy who refused to speak after losing his father and simply colored beside him for an hour. At first, she came home exhausted in a way she had never known, not physically but morally. Every story she heard forced her to confront how small her understanding of hardship had been. One evening, Grace found Vivian sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of donated children's books. "What are those?" Grace asked. "For the center." Grace touched one of the covers. "Can I help?" Vivian looked at Elijah before answering, asking permission without words. Elijah said nothing. Vivian turned back to Grace. "Yes, I'd like that." They sorted books together. Grace made piles by age group. Vivian listened while Grace explained which books were good for kids who got scared at night. She did not interrupt. She did not correct. She listened as if Grace were teaching her something important, because she was. Later that week, Vivian apologized again, but this time she did not make it about herself. She sat with Grace on the back steps and said, "When you spilled paint on my rug, I made you feel smaller than an object. That was wrong. Adults are supposed to protect children from feeling that way." Grace picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I thought you didn't like me." Vivian swallowed. "I liked you, but I didn't know how to love you correctly. That was my fault, not yours." Grace was quiet for a long time. "My mom liked messy paintings," she said. Vivian's eyes filled, but she kept her voice steady. "I wish I could have seen them." Grace looked at her. "I can show you some." That was the first door Grace opened. Vivian did not rush through it. As the weeks passed, Vivian changed in ways Elijah could not ignore. She attended Grace's school meeting and introduced herself simply as Grace's stepmother, then let Elijah do most of the talking because he knew his daughter best. She learned Grace hated peas, loved thunderstorms, and kept one of Naomi's scarves in her dresser drawer. She stopped trying to make herself central in rooms where Naomi's memory belonged. At the center, Vivian saw how many parents needed more than emergency help. They needed training, transportation, childcare, and a path to work that would not collapse the first time life became difficult. She remembered the trade center where Elijah had learned HVAC repair. She remembered his hands lifted under the fluorescent lights as he said they had kept Grace's lights on. Quietly, using her own savings, Vivian began setting up a vocational fund for single parents. It would help cover tuition, tools, childcare, and transportation for practical training programs, HVAC repair, electrical work, nursing assistance, commercial driving, and mechanical trades. She did not name it after herself. She named it the Naomi Brooks Vocational Fund. Elijah found out from Denise, not Vivian. When he confronted her, Vivian looked frightened, as if she expected him to accuse her of manipulation. "Why Naomi?" he asked. Vivian clasped her hands together. "Because she believed in you before I knew how to respect you. Because Grace should see her mother's name attached to something that helps people. And because I needed to do one thing that was not about making the Hartwell name look generous." Elijah wanted to distrust it. Part of him still did.
But the paperwork was real.
The first 5 scholarships, funded directly from Vivian's own savings while the full program was being built, were real. And Vivian had told no reporters, invited no photographers, and put her own name nowhere. That night, after Vivian left, Elijah called Martin Price about the estate. Martin reminded him that Samuel's will included a character clause. "Your uncle was very clear," Martin said. "If the inheritance were used for revenge, reckless waste, coercion, or deliberate harm to family, most of it would transfer into charitable trust. If used to build community stability, education, or family welfare, the estate would vest fully in your control." Elijah sat in silence. He had not known the exact language. He had only known he did not want to become cruel. "You understand what this means?" Martin asked. Elijah looked at Grace's drawing on the refrigerator, then at the brochure Vivian had left about the vocational fund. "It means Samuel knew me better than I thought." On the 45th day, Vivian came to the house after dinner. Grace was upstairs. Elijah had the divorce petition on the table. Vivian saw it and went still. "I understand," she said. Elijah waited. "I won't fight you," she continued. "I won't ask for your money. I won't let my parents turn this into war. If you decide to leave, I will spend the rest of my life making sure our child knows you are a good father." He studied her face. There were tears in her eyes, but she was not using them as a weapon. "And if I don't leave today?" he asked. Vivian drew a careful breath. "Then I will keep doing the work. Not for 45 days, for as long as it takes." Elijah looked at the papers. He thought of the mansion, the prenup, the gallery, Grace's fear, Vivian's voice calling his daughter a responsibility from another life. He could not erase those things. But he also thought of Grace showing Vivian Naomi's paintings, of the fund, of Vivian sitting in a folding chair at the center, tired and unpolished, reading to a child who missed his father, of a baby who would soon arrive and deserve more than a battlefield. He put the divorce papers back into the envelope. "I'm not forgiving everything," he said. Vivian nodded. "I'm not forgetting. I know. If you make Grace feel unwanted again, I'm gone. I know. If you use money or your family to control me, I'm gone. I know." He stood. "Then we keep going, slowly." Vivian covered her mouth, but she did not run to him. She understood now that being allowed to stay was not the same as being restored. Several months later, after a long season of uneasy rebuilding, their son was born. They named him Isaiah Brooks. In the hospital room, Elijah held Vivian's hand through the final hour of labor. Not because the past had vanished, but because he refused to let his son's first breath be surrounded by coldness. When the nurse placed Isaiah in Vivian's arms, Grace stood beside the bed, wide-eyed and trembling with wonder. "Can I hold him?" she asked. Elijah helped her sit. Vivian carefully placed the baby in Grace's arms. Grace looked at her brother, then at Vivian. "Will he live in a house where kids are allowed to make mistakes?" Vivian began to cry. "Yes," she said, "and where grown-ups have to learn how to fix theirs." By the time Isaiah was 3 months old, they had moved fully back to Atlanta. The house was modest, noisy, and alive. Grace's drawings covered the refrigerator. Isaiah's blankets were usually in the wrong room. Elijah still worked HVAC calls, not because he needed every paycheck, but because the work reminded him who he was before money gave other people permission to respect him. He also expanded the Trade Center program with funds from Samuel's estate and Vivian's vocational fund. Single parents came to learn skills that could change the shape of their lives. Some brought children who sat in the corner with snacks and coloring books, while their mothers and fathers learned wiring diagrams, refrigeration cycles, safety codes, and the dignity of useful work. Vivian continued at the center and later returned to the art world differently. She organized private auctions for scholarship funding, helped unknown artists find buyers, and used rooms that once made Elijah feel invisible to raise money for people who had been invisible to her. Charles and Beatrice tried to return to Vivian's life as if nothing permanent had changed. Vivian did not allow it. They could see their grandchildren only if they respected Elijah, Grace, Isaiah, and Naomi's memory. The first time Beatrice referred to Grace as Elijah's daughter instead of simply Grace, Vivian ended the visit. The prenup remained in a legal file. It had been written to protect a wealthy woman from a poor man. In the end, it protected Elijah from people who could recognize value only after it came with a dollar amount. One afternoon, Elijah stood inside the expanded trade center, watching a class of parents work over open units. Grace sat at a table nearby, doing homework between sketches. Vivian entered with Isaiah on her hip and a lunch bag in her hand. There was no mansion, no silver table, no cold audience waiting to judge him. Only the hum of machines, the sound of Grace laughing, and a family still learning day by day how to love with respect. Money had not made Elijah Brooks valuable. It had only forced the people who once looked down on him to see the value that had been there all along. And maybe that was the lesson Samuel Brooks had wanted to leave behind. Wealth can reveal people, but character is what decides what happens next. Elijah could have used money to punish everyone who hurt him. Instead, he used it to protect his children, rebuild his family with boundaries, and open doors for people who simply needed a chance. Vivian could not undo the pain she caused, but she learned that love is not proven by pretty words, expensive gifts, or public apologies. It is proven by humility, accountability, and the daily choice to treat people with dignity. So if this story reminded you that a person's worth should never be measured by their job, their bank account, their background, or the clothes they wear, make sure to follow the channel. There are more stories here about justice, forgiveness, second chances, and the quiet strength of ordinary people who were valuable long before the world finally noticed.